I think it's time I do a comparison of these two very elegant boots built in India. I've reviewed them before, but not next to each other, so let's go. G'day, welcome back to Bootlosophy, my channel about heritage boots. I'm filming on Wajak country here in Perth, Kalikor Wajak Nongabuja. So these are my two pairs of boots from Indian brand BlkBrd, spelt BlkBrd, interesting conjunction of that word. I really like these two boots. They are used by me in much more formal occasions than I use my other boots. In fact, I consider them dress boots. Not merely because of the leathers that they're constructed in, like this Scotch grain tan leather and this Horween shell cordovan. Sure, they're actually quite dressy leathers, but I think the design, the shape of these boots, as well as their construction, can be construed as quite dressy boots if you need or like dressy boots. You know, it's really interesting. A lot of brands from China are manufacturing American style work boots or American style P&W boots, boondockers, service boots, and so on. Very few manufacturers outside of the main countries manufacture boots that look like UK boots. And to my mind, BlkBrd produces a much more refined set of boots. And I think a lot of them are based on, because India is an old British colony, and their experience of making boots would be to support the boot making brands in the UK, I think a lot of their designs tend to edge towards the UK style rather than the American style, even though this might be called a service boot. I've also done a review comparing BlkBrd to Craft and Glory, another Indian brand, and in that video I believe I outlined the contrast between these two Indian brands. One is leaning towards the more dressy, and Craft and Glory leaning more towards the American combat boot, service boot, that sort of type of boot. Now, I have reviewed both of these boots, but let me introduce to them. This is called the Luchador. It's in Scotch grain, and Luchador is the name of those masked Mexican wrestlers. If you know what I mean, go look it up. And this boot, again, a very elegant boot in this Horween Color 8 Chrome XL. This one is called the Rudiger, which on my research, I find it is a German name, and it usually means something like a brave warrior or warrior's spear. It's interesting that I think this BlkBrd brand leans towards these uncharacteristic names. Now, in my opinion, BlkBrd is a quality boot manufacturer. As I go through these, I'll point out to you where I think their construction surpasses a lot of QC type issues that you might find in other boots of this sort of price range. So it's intriguing to me that they don't find an Indian name and be much more forward about being an Indian company and be proud of their roots and so on. For example, I played around with Google a little bit. The Luchador is a Mexican wrestler. Now, I looked up wrestling in India, and there is a city called Kolhapur, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Kolhapur, which apparently is the wrestling capital of India. There is a form of Indian wrestling quite similar to Turkish wrestling. So they could have named this the BlkBrd Kolhapur and lean in towards their Indian roots. The Rudiger, the German name for brave warrior or warrior spear, could be the Indian name Kuntham. Again, I hope I'm pronouncing that right and not swearing in Indian. Kuntham apparently means warrior's spear. So a BlkBrd Kuntham service boot, derby boot, and a BlkBrd Kolhapur toe cap toe boot. What would be wrong with that? I think that would be fantastic, leaning into the Indian origins. All right, so I've got my notes in front of me. I want to talk about these two boots and compare them as Dressier English heritage style boots. So let me start with the leathers. In this case, the Kolhapur, or the Luchador boot, is made of a Scotch grain leather. I can't remember where this leather is from, but I don't think it's from a named tannery. But it's a really lovely, well-polished, very waxy in the hand leather. It's very smooth. It can be polished up really nicely. I have slightly by myself burnished the toe cap and the heel, just to provide it with that sort of slightly different coloring in the burnishing. I've conditioned this leather with Venetian shoe cream. Not that it needed it, but it's quite firm. The temper is actually quite firm. And as you can see, I haven't worn this that much, to be honest, but as you can see, even with the few times I've worn it, it is beginning to crease along there and collapse, but not on that side. And I think partially that's the leather. It's quite thick, good 3mm, I think, but it's also partially structured and it's fully lined, hence the structuring. So when I put it on, it feels really quite firm. The other boot, the Rudiger, what I would call the Kuntam, is made of Horween's shell cordovan. Here's the interesting thing, you know, when I reviewed this boot, I got a few comments. Are you sure that's Horween? You know, it's almost like, I don't want to call it reverse racism, but it's almost like if it's an Indian company, they must be scamming. That's not really Horween. But BlkBrd is a now well-known, internationally well-known Indian brand. So with their websites in different countries, with reviews from all over the place, reviewing them, I think they would be really silly trying to pass this off as a Horween shell cordovan. If it's not, Horween would sue them. And incidentally, you can actually see the Horween stamp here on the reverse side. And it is definitely cordovan, it is shell cordovan. However, a little bit of cost cutting comes in that they put in a leather tongue. See, there's a rough out. Instead of a shell cordovan tongue. So I don't know how much that piece costs, but it would shave a bit off the price. So again, the style is a derby / service boot style, very elegant, lovely toe shape. It is quite almond shaped, but it's a lovely toe shape, quite a low profile boot, very simple, plain toe, whereas this is a cap toe. So a very elegant design with quite large quarters and a single piece backstay that's cups the heel and then goes up the middle, a bit like a boondocker style backstay. This one has that same design as well in the back. In terms of construction, they're really well constructed. I said at the beginning that I'm really impressed by the QC and the little details in this. They're both double row stitched down, where one row goes all the way through from the edge of the welt through to the outsole in both cases. And then the second row of stitches is basically stitching the uppers to the midsole only. And then the rubber outsole is put on, and then the second stitch is put on. But the stitching on both are just incredibly good. They're very even. They're both of the stitching is very, very even. You can see the slightly thicker leather in this because of that uplift. However, I don't think this is a real cap toe, because you can see the second layer of the toe cap rising above this layer here, but then it goes down into a single layer. So the double layer is only where the toe cap meets the vamp. The stitching on the body of the boot are both excellent. In this case, it's almost the same stitching really. It's a double row and single row stitch at the quarters. It's a very neat double row stitch and in the backstay. It's a very neat single stitch up alongside the hardware, and then there's a box to secure that corner of that quarter. So very well put together. Again on this one, on the Luchador, the stitching is slightly not as clean as on the Rudiger, but it also has, in this case, a double row stitch in the quarters. It has a little box, but in a slightly different pattern. It's slightly above the actual double stitch. And everything else is double stitch again, except for the backstay, which is very small, neat double stitching. Sorry, everything else is single stitch, if I said double stitch. The hardware on the Luchador is antique brass, 4 eyelets and 3 speed hooks, and they're all secured with a backing washer. So there's no scratching on the tongue at all. In the Rudiger, it's a slightly darker sort of antiquing on the hardware, but the same format of 4 eyelets and 3 speed hooks, and again, beautifully backed. So the quality of construction is fantastic. In terms of the soles, this one is a Vibram sole. It's called the Vibram's Eton sole, after the town and school in England. And this is actually a little bit softer, I think, than this proprietary sole on the Luchador, which is clearly a duplication. I won't say that word. I won't say that C word. It's a duplication of Day-Night, but it is branded BlkBrd. The actual depth of the studs is a little bit higher in the Luchador. So when you're walking, you do tend to have a effect, whereas this is much more of a flat footfall. The composition on this proprietary outsole is a bit firmer than the Vibram Eton, and I do prefer the comfort of the footfall on this because there's more rubber. I think this is a lot harder. Not that it's uncomfortable, but it's just a lot firmer on the footfall. And talking about comfort, both have removable leather-topped padded insoles, removable insoles, on which, and they sit on leather midsoles, the leather insoles and leather midsoles with, I think both have a layer of cork despite it being stitched down, because usually with Goodyear welt, you have a thick welt that goes around that creates a bit of a cavity. In the case of stitch down, there is no such cavity because the insole sits firmly on the midsole. But in both cases, I believe they put a small patch of cork into the base of the boot. And they both have steel shanks, so really well constructed, goodish materials. And in this case, a much more expensive boot with the Horween shell cordovan. One of the interesting things about the Horween shell cordovan in this, I have another pair of Colour 8 shell cordovans from Alden. And I don't know what Alden do to their shell cordovans. I've heard they actually put another layer on. It is definitely a darker Colour 8 than this one. And one of the issues with this one, I put some Colour 8 cream on this, and it dulled it a little bit. So I'm having problems repolishing it up to the sheen and shine that it had. Not that there's anything wrong with it, all right? Don't even get it into your head that this is a scam copy of a Horween shell cordovan leather. It is definitely Horween. It is definitely shell cordovan. I just haven't taken care of it very well. Both of them I use to go to the office, so neither of them have seen wonderful wear. But for the price you get, and look, you can say that's an American service boot, but in my mind, that also fits a lot of models done by, perhaps not Trickers, but by Cheney, for example, by Loke. They all have this sort of plain derby boot kind of look to them. And this one is clearly, I mean, this could be a Cheney, this could be a Loke, you know, with that sort of perforated toe cap and the Scotch grain. Just lovely. So, prices. The Luchador, or what I'd like to call the Kolhapper, sells for US $275 to $345. I'm beginning to give you US prices because that seems to be a good indication that you can translate to Australian or euros or whatever. So, US $225 to $345, depending on the type of leather that you choose. And you can also get this in Horween shell cordovan for $795 US. The Rudiger, otherwise known as the Kuntam, In shell cordovan form is also $795, and you can get them in similar leathers as you get in the Luchador for, again, US $225 to US $345, depending on the leathers. So both are well within those lower range price range category boots, and yet both are remarkably well made, and for the price of, what was it, $225 to $345, not shell cordovan, they fall within the Red Wing kind of price range, don't they? They're slightly more than the Thursdays, and they're slightly less than the Parkhursts, and around the same range as the Grant Stones. So all of a sudden, these look really good value. So I enjoy wearing these. I like the looks of them. I like the feel of them. This one, I think, is possibly a little firm in its temper, so that I'm still, and I'm not sure I've considered I've broken this in. I'm still feeling the binding around the collar when I'm walking. So it takes a while to get used to this leather. The shell cordovan, on the other hand, is flexed, and it's really doing what shell cordovan does. Very comfortable. Really enjoy them. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed this brief review or brief comparison between these two BlkBrd boots. If I indulge in my desire to have US work boots, US service boots, I would probably go to the Lewis Jets of the world for a cheaper range boot that's made well. If I indulge towards the English end of the world in English boots and pretend I'm wearing Northampton boots, I would probably lean towards the Indian manufacturing, and in particular the BlkBrd brand. And you know, you tell me, why would this not be a Crockett & Jones? Why would this not be a Loke? Looks the same. The quality, I think, is amazing. So there you go. I hope you like this little comparison. It's just a carry forward of my original review of these two boots, which you can go and see. And if you liked it, I hope you do, please click on like, please click on subscribe, and comment. Nice comment. Take care out there, and I'll see you soon.